Hello, welcome to the Order of Malta's third webinar on human trafficking. The first two webinars dealt with religious working against human trafficking through action and advocacy. You can find the recordings on our website www.laudatosi.org, also with subtitles in various languages. In December, we are now continuing this series with two additional webinars dealing with the health impact of human trafficking on victims. Today, we shall focus on trauma, and next week, on the 8th of December, on healing of victims of human trafficking. I would like to especially thank three people who made our October webinars possible: Sister Miriam Baike and our webmaster, Yves Reichenbach, as well as my assistant, Felix van Lavik. We are happy to welcome today three new speakers. First, Irena Kraja, psychologist at MWL, Advice and Service Center of Tirana, ASC, in Albania. Second, Dr. Elizabeth Sands, medical doctor, UNODC, project coordinator, liaison officer with WHO in Geneva. And then Theo Hendricks, founder of the MANA Foundation. The MANA Foundation offers psychological, pastoral, and therapeutic help and advices on a clinical basis. He is also a former police official in the Netherlands. We will have time for questions at the end of these webinars. You can ask your questions through the Q&A chat, and our moderator shall convey them to the speakers. This webinar is part of a series to raise awareness, to learn from each other, to promote action at all levels: governments, international organizations, civil society, and of course academia and religious organizations. And now it is my great pleasure to give the floor to our moderator, Sister Miriam Baike.
So I think Michelle has already explained you the basics, and also that this webinar will be recorded. So it's my work now to and my honor to introduce Irena Kraja, our first speaker, to you. She is psychologist and coordinator of Mary Ward Loreto Advice and Service Center in Tirana. And her first degree is in psychology. She holds a Master of Arts in Counseling and is specialized in cognitive behavioral therapy. She has been employed over the past 9 years in Mary Ward Loreto Albania projects, working with women and girls in rural areas of Albania. Since 2016, she is the coordinator of Mary Ward Loreto Women Advice Service Center of Tirana in Albania. During her work, she develops initial identification of presumed victims of trafficking and victims of trafficking at the Women Advice Service Center and works through their reintegration programs. She develops psychological counseling and therapy sessions with women and young adults. She is assisting with the Albanian victims in the shelters of Medai Trust in the United Kingdom through online assessment and counseling, and when possible, directly in the safe houses. She is also providing psychological evidence to support the process of asylum-seeking applications. Irena, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Miriam, for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me today to, and the next day of the webinar as well, to talk about trauma, to talk about human trafficking, and to share what I learned and what I faced while working with people who suffer or who underwent or are survivors of trauma. In fact, this is a health, it's a psychological, it's a social, cultural, personal, it's as well a political topic. So it's not just a psychological, and it is indeed a very sensitive topic, because to understand trauma is important to have information about it, but it is more important to have awareness to have empathy, solidarity, to be helpful for those who undergo or survive trauma, but as well to bring hope and justice into their life. So today I'm going to talk about trauma in general and as well be a bit specific. But on the next webinar, I'm talking more specifically about trauma and human trafficking. So, we are talking about trauma and post-trauma. I can move the slides, right? Okay. Okay. What is important to understand for us is that we consider trauma any event that can cause threat to a person or that is perceived as a threat to a person, or when somebody is witnessing a traumatic event, is witnessing an event that is threatening, that brings fear and danger to the person. So traumatic experiences may include being in or witnessing a serious accident, being physically assaulted, being in a war, being involved in natural disaster, witnessing sexual assault or abuse. And we have to understand that traumatic events are really overwhelming. Trauma is a response that is deeply distressing or disturbing. This response is to an event which is disturbing, which is fearful, which is perceived as well as an event that can bring some changes to the life. These events that happen directly, or these are events that happen to somebody close to us. I'm really sorry because I became a bit emotional. I worked for many years with people who suffer trauma, and sometimes I feel like trauma is not just about the person. Trauma is as well about us, because we are responsible on the way how we deal with these people. We have to understand that trauma lies on a continuum, but is always a fight, flight, or a freeze response. So when we undergo an event which is actually threatening, we have to react. The reaction is has to be immediate, and at this moment we don't have sometimes time to think. So we fight, we run away, or we freeze. Emotional and psychological trauma is a damage or injury to the brain after living through an extremely frightening or distressing event. Trauma causes some injuries to the brain, and this is important for us to understand that we cannot function in the same way when we undergo trauma. Trauma affects the way and the ability to think, which means that the brain goes from learning mode to survival mode. In everyday life, we face problems and we find solutions. While during trauma or after trauma, this ability is affected and we don't see things as positively as we used to see before. There are some types of trauma: small trauma and large trauma. Small trauma are events that exceed our capacity to cope and cause disruption or in emotional functioning. This might be everything: the loss of a job, feeling betrayed, divorce, while large T's large traumas are traumas that really affect the way of functioning. So it's not just a loss of a job, but it's an extraordinary or a significant event that happens to us. It is acute trauma that results from a single stressful or dangerous event, chronic trauma, repeated and prolonged exposure to highly stressful events, complex trauma that results from exposure to multiple traumatic events, and I included here as well childhood trauma, because it's very important to understand that to children, what happens to them is what is done to them. And complex trauma, which can start as well from childhood, may affect even the personality, and in many cases can bring even personality disorder. There are many consequences of the trauma, and sometimes we don't know where to start. So there are not symptoms that we can say this is the first sign of trauma. And it all goes in a circle. It can start from feeling depressed mood, insomnia, nightmares, difficulty concentrating, and it can go even to suicide attempts or suicide thoughts. Here are some pictures that I wanted to talk about, because trauma somewhere is a trauma everywhere. Nothing that happens around us belongs to the people that happens. We see, we witness, and especially nowadays with the social media and all the news, it seems like we face the same issues. For example, now we are going through a pandemic situation, and it's like a universal traumatic event, although everybody reacts differently to this event. There are those people who are traumatized or who are facing other mental or emotional issues because this event brought into surface other anxieties. There is that group of people who don't believe in virus and actually don't feel any kind of traumatic events, and those who see the danger but don't live in fear. I mean that the traumatic event can be the same for everybody, but the way we perceive it is the way we feel it, whether we go through trauma and how we cope with it. In the first picture, what we see, we all remember 11th of September, and we all remember the terrorist attack. Why was it a trauma for many people that saw that news? We are talking about America. We are talking about the most powerful country, which is considered to be safe as well. So that, in an unpredicted way, happened in the most powerful place. So what triggers this to everybody and why people can perceive it as trauma? It's because nothing is safe. And when our safety is, let's say, attacked, our way of thinking and our existence is not secure anymore. The second picture, which is considered to be one of the pictures that has raised more awareness, is a child. Why the photograph? I don't like posting children pictures, especially when it is so sad, but the photographer took the picture from an angle that everybody can project the danger that can happen to them. People could see a child, but they would put the face of their children to this child. like tomorrow, this might happen to my children. So what happened there came closer to us. The other picture is a tsunami, like it's a huge phenomenon, which we are afraid of things that we cannot control. It's the war in Syria. It's the earthquake in Albania. The earthquake, it's a natural disaster and it's a traumatic event, but what triggered it? It happened during the night when people went to sleep, hoping for another day, planning for another day, safe, quiet, calm, that tomorrow they will go on with their plans. Just when they were more quiet, sleeping, an earthquake happened, and it has shaken the whole of their existence like nothing was like before. And this traumatic event not only changed their lives, but it changed how they see now even those safety moments that they consider like safety moments. And the other picture is the fire in Australia. I was looking at the comments that people made on social media about the fire, and they spoke about the poor kangaroos. Why? Because traumatic event is considered more an event that happens to those who are not guilty, to those who actually become victims. They pay for nothing. They have done nothing and pay for nothing. So that's why violence, that's why sexual assault, that's why bullying, that's why murder, everything can be considered a trauma, because it happens to those who are not paying for something. Trauma occurs when threat and injustice is perceived. When people don't perceive something as a threat, they don't perceive it as an injustice, when they are not aware that actually this is going against their values, is going against their beliefs, against their perceptions, they don't perceive it as trauma. Okay, so this is the 6-day war. So I used this video to illustrate how how trauma can start. Starting one day when somebody less expected it, when they don't know what is going to happen. So starting Monday and ending on Saturday, and feeling like tomorrow will never come. And when tomorrow comes, it's too late because the damage is done. So nobody and nothing can undo what happened. And the person feels hopeless. And even working with victims and survivors of human trafficking, although the event has ended, they are safe, they are not exposed to danger, but they feel like this event is still present with them. Tomorrow has come for them, people are there helping and supporting, but they feel like it's too late. And although they might have a sense of justice, they still continue to feel the injustice. And so we go from the 6-day war to the post effects of the trauma, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. I don't want to see it as a disorder. I want to see it as a natural human response, although it might take a long time. And it's important for us to understand that post-traumatic stress is a reaction that lasts for a long time, and that all of us feels some feelings, or we have some symptoms of post-traumatic stress, although we cannot include them as post-traumatic stress because we all react in an emotional way towards a traumatic event. So we can go through acute stress disorder, or we can go through PTSD. PTSD is when these feelings continue and for a longer time, and as well they increase and they become so strong, so the person does not function as before. These symptoms can begin within 3 months of the events and can last even for years. The symptoms are as written here, but I want to show them and illustrate them with a video that speaks just about how a survivor or victim of human trafficking feels PTSD.
I'd get here. I used to be an ordinary girl. Now, I'm just a sex object. I thought of escaping, but they did whatever they wanted with me. I could breathe, but I felt dead inside. When I was rescued, I thought the worst part was over. Then, I realized I didn't know what I was saying. I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. I felt horrified all the time, and didn't know why. I couldn't forget the traumatic event, as they started calling it. Thoughts, images, voices were always in my mind, reminding me of the horror I felt there. Even at nights, I dreamed about it. I was afraid of being awake because the thoughts wouldn't disappear, but sleeping terrified me even more. The dreams felt so real. I had the sensation that I never left that horrible place. My family told me to talk about it, but I tried to avoid everything related with the event, places, men, everything. I just stayed home, trying to forget all about it, but it seemed impossible. My friends and family tried to convince me to get back to my normal life, but I just couldn't. Everything they told me made me mad. I had angry attacks every day without exception. I couldn't go anywhere, nor do anything without thinking about it. I tried. I really tried, but I just couldn't. And nobody seemed to understand it. I was alone. Whenever someone tried to come close, I would push them away. Why would I want them to be close if they didn't get me? I felt like it could happen again. I felt like I would never get over it. I just wanted to be alone. I didn't let people help me, kiss me, or even hug me. I thought there was no future. I wished the pain would stop. I didn't want to live anymore. It took a long time to finally feel alive again.
Okay. So that is actually illustrated what are the symptoms of PTSD and how it feels after going through human trafficking and exploitation. In fact, trauma is a cry for help, is a cry for justice, and is a cry for union. So although somebody might seem like they don't want anybody close to them, it is actually asking for help. Although they may seem like they don't want it, it's a way to ask for it, to cry for it even more. So before I thank you, I wanted to say that we can help and we are here to help, and thank you for inviting me today.
Dear Irena, thank you so much for this very clear and impressive explanation about what trauma is. With this introduction, you set the ground for this webinar and also for the following webinar next week, because now we have an idea what we are speaking about, and we have an idea how severe and grave this problem of trauma is, what we are handling or what we want to deepen today and next week. So thank you very much, and looking forward to see you again next week for trauma and human trafficking. Now I can introduce the second speaker of our event. It is Dr. Elizabeth Sayens. She holds several academic medical degrees, and she works with the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, Prevention, Treatment and Rehabilitation Section, Drug Prevention and Health Branch since 2007 as an expert on drug dependency treatment, and since 2010 as a project coordinator. In this role, she is responsible for the coordination of a portfolio of drug treatment global projects such as TreatNet2 and the UNODC WHO Joint Program on Drug Dependency Treatment and Care. So, Dr. Sayens, you have the floor, and please unmute yourself.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Perfect. Okay. Thank you very much for this kind invitation to participate in this webinar. I feel very honored as in my new position as liaison officer of UNODC here in Geneva. So is that the first slide? No. Sorry. Okay. So in my presentation, I'm going to talk about human trafficking and drugs and how are these two related. To be very honest, as you heard from my work history and my expertise, I have been working with drug use disorders for the past 13 years with UNODC. And UNODC is also an agency that deals with the United Nations Transnational Organized Crime Convention. And one of the topics I will explain later is trafficking in persons. So what is the connection between these two issues? This is what my presentation is going to talk about. So first of all, I'm going to talk about UNODC. I'm going to mention why it is important to look at these problems from the perspective of development. Then I'm going to tell you about a little bit about the Convention of Transnational Organized Crime. A few key concepts. I know that many of you are experts on this, so I will go quickly. And then a little bit of the relationship between trafficking in persons and drug use disorders and suggestions for a way forward. So the United Nations United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime was established in 1997, and it's a specialized agency on issues related to drugs and crime, as the name says. So it is the guardian of very important international treaties, such as the Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime, but also the 3 conventions related to narcotic drugs, psychotropic substances, and all the issues related to the illicit trafficking on drugs and psychotropic substances. We have a network of 100 and something offices. All of these offices, depending on the priority problems of the respective countries, will have regional projection, local projection, country projection, or even only project projection. So when it comes to human trafficking, these are the countries or regions of the world that, because the problem is more important or relevant, then where our offices have operations, and they work, as you know, usually the UN, we work with governments, but we also work with other partners locally, including civil society organizations and communities at large. So in the framework of the development goal, the 2030 development agenda, we need to mention and be very much aware that trafficking in persons is affecting the possibility of these affected countries to reach these goals. It affects gender equality, goal 5.2, which calls for the elimination of all forms of violence against women. It affects number 8, because it calls for the eradication of forced labor, and we know the connection between human trafficking and forced labor. The same for peace, ending abuse, exploitation, trafficking of all forms. Then we have other sustainable development goals, like 10, which calls to facilitate and safe and responsible migration. So all the issues related to illicit migration, smuggling of migrants, etc. Then number 4, 4.3 and 4.4, which call for increased technical and vocational education, access to education, and 17 that call for partnership and sustainable development. So in order to achieve these sustainable development goals, we need to consider how human trafficking is connected to larger issues affecting our societies, from education, labor, job opportunities, access to health, community engagement, and so on and so forth. So the United Nations Conventions Against Transnational Organized Crime has a protocol to prevent and suppress trafficking in persons, and also has a protocol specific for the smuggling of migrants. I assume that you are all very familiar with these concepts, but I wanted to tell you from the perspective of the UN. So what is the United Nations Transnational Organized Crime Convention? First, it's a legally binding instrument. It means that when member states sign the conventions, they need to follow the provisions of this convention. It's the only international convention that deals with organized crime. It was signed in 2000. It was adopted by the General Assembly in 2003. And it represents an international commitment of member states to counteract transnational organized crime. So these are the number of countries that have ratified the conventions and the different protocols. And then here we have, according to the convention and according to the protocols, what are the definitions. So according to the trafficking in persons protocols, trafficking composes 3 aspects: the act of recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring or receipt of person, the means of the threat or use of the force or other forms of coercion, abduction, fraud, etc. that are related to the trafficking of a person, and the purpose. Because the purpose, when we talk about trafficking in persons, is about exploitation. So exploitation, to be defined as such, has to comply with that minimum: the exploitation for prostitution of others or any form of sexual exploitation, forced labor of services, slavery or practices similar to slavery or servitude, and very important, the removal of organs, which is a topic that tends to be forgotten. Of course, there is a long list of other forms of exploitation that are listed in the protocols, and I invite you, if you're interested, to look at them. So it is very important when we talk about trafficking in persons and its definition that the consent of a victim of trafficking has no value at all, because remember that people are coerced, people are deceived, people are offered all sorts of amazing possibilities for a better life compared to the conditions in which they live. So this has no value at all. Yeah, and the purpose of exploitation, of course, immediately eliminates the idea that the person has given their consent for that. So this is just a table that very nicely compiles the definition, the act, the mean, and the purpose, that when the three are combined, we can say clearly that we're talking about trafficking in persons. Already in 2016, United Nations Office on Drugs or Crime released a global report that talked about how much the discrepancies or the differences that there were in terms of gender, and reported that women and girls are usually trafficked, especially for the purpose of marriage and sexual slavery. Men and boys with a smaller proportion are usually trafficked for the purposes of labor or slavery, etc. Incredibly, in my opinion, even though we have been working already for 15 years under the framework of this convention, the report of 2018 still reports that women are being particularly victims of traffic, and it is proportionally when compared with men, and the purpose of the trafficking is usually for sexual exploitation, and this is the most prevalent form of crime. So just to make for anybody in the audience that may not know the difference, it is different to talk about trafficking in persons than smuggling in migrants. The smuggling of migrants is the procurement of the means to move a person from one country to another, yeah, in exchange for money or for beneficial. And this is a table that very nicely shows the difference between trafficking in person and smuggling of migrants, because some people tend to confuse. In terms of geography, trafficking can be inside the same country or outside, while smuggling of migrants automatically imply the movement to another country. In terms of purpose, trafficking is always for the purpose of exploiting somebody, whilst smuggling of migrants is simply the means. Migrants move, smugglers of migrants simply move people in exchange for money. In terms of consent, victims of trafficking, they may consent on the basis of the deceit or what is promised to them in exchange, while the smuggling, the people who are smuggled usually consent and are willing to pay to be transported to another country, and so on and so forth. So I won't stay for the sake of time with all the small details. Now I want to move, and I am very happy that my predecessor talked about trauma and all aspects related to trauma, because drug use disorders, one of the main things we need to break and we need to change definitely around the world is the stigma and discrimination that is associated to the fact that there is the belief that people are responsible, that people are guilty, that people are causing a drug use disorder to themselves, because precisely trauma is one of the main leading factors, especially in women, to the development of a drug use disorder. But I want to start talking about drugs to mention the role of UNODC in the drug control system, because we are, as I said, together with the International Narcotics Control Board, are the guardians of the International Convention on Narcotics and Psychotropics. These are the three conventions, 61, 71, and 88, and I want to highlight one thing of the convention. Drug addiction, which was the language used back in 72 or in 61, is the result of unwholesome social atmosphere in which those who are most exposed to the danger of drugs abuse live. So this is a concept that member states already agreed back in 1961. This is as old as I know. And even though a lot has changed in terms of the concepts, the knowledge that we have nowadays about how the brain works from pregnancy, early childhood, all the rewiring of the brain that leads to the development of drug use disorders, already in 1961, people responsible to write these international treaties knew that people who develop drug use disorders come from a long history of suffering, trauma, neglect, violence, and you name it. Yeah. So, in line with this, I want to mention and invite all of you to read the booklet 5 of the World Drug Report 2020 that makes a specific association and explain all the rationale of why deprived socioeconomic characteristics are associated with the initiation of drug use and the development of drug use disorders, precisely because that long life history of suffering, violence, neglect, abuse, and for just to give you an example, 65% of women who develop a drug use disorder have been victims of sexual abuse. So in this graph, you can see how all this poverty, lack of education, violence, community disengagement, and so on and so forth, contribute to the development or to drug use and development of drug use disorders, and at the same time, drug use disorders, because of the effect they have in the individual, the family, the community, and the society at large, are keeping a very a dramatic vicious cycle from which is very difficult for the people to leave. So when we look at the relationship between drug use and trafficking, and I want to especially thank Ms. Maria Spano, who is interning with me in UNODC, for having helped me find the information to put in this presentation. More than 70% of victims of human trafficking or trafficking in person have reported using a substance. And it's common because it's usually in ways people who are trafficked are either coerced to use drugs by their traffickers so that they can perform the either sex work, etc., under the effects of substances, or they turn to the use of substances to cope with the difficult mental conditions and usually terrible circumstances in which these people need to live. So in this case, we see, for example, in the case of coercion into drug use, people use the drugs to recruit people, yeah? People, they know somebody has a drug use disorder, they depend on the drug, they need the drug, so that they offer the drugs in exchange for agreeing to engage in activities and therefore traffic, or to control and keep. If they are giving the drugs, yeah, let's say a sex worker or somebody, children, we see this in some countries in the East where children are weaving carpets. So they are given the drugs so that they can work longer hours. They are given stimulants. But what happens is that when you take the drugs from them, they are dependent, so they need the drugs. So they continue to do the slavery work in exchange for getting the drugs because they are dependent, and this is something people cannot control. As a coping mechanism, well, some victims of human trafficking or trafficking in person may use substances as a response to the trauma of all the process and the situation in which they find themselves that the majority of people don't know. And we saw in the video before, these are usually young girls, young women that are promised to work as models, to work as secretaries. Imagine they come from environments of poverty, lack of everything, and then all of a sudden they find themselves living in small places that their documents are taken from them, so no identification, no place, no family, no language, sometimes not even the language that is spoken locally. So, of course, drugs can serve as the knockdown to cope with these terrible conditions. And then in terms of the effects of the drug, a person that is already traumatized by the circumstances of being trafficked, in addition, start using drugs, so these persons can start having feeling of powerlessness, can have suicidal and homicidal ideas, develop the drug use disorders, other health problems associated with drug use, especially if injecting, for example, HIV, hepatitis C, also tuberculosis, depending on the conditions, and of course others such as unprotected sex-related infections and others. Yeah. So one of the potential solutions could be in the healthcare. This is very interesting information that Maria found for me. Up to 88% of people who have been trafficked and are working as sex workers come in contact with the health system because of the drug use problem. So what can we do to sensitize health professionals and make them aware and be able to respond and identify a potential victim, and working together in collaboration and in cooperation with law enforcement, for example, or with social protection, be able to help and support that victim of trafficking. So, almost ending, some quotes. According to our Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, said, "Human trafficking takes many forms and knows no borders. Human traffickers too often operate with impunity, with their crimes receiving no nearly enough attention. This must change." This is a call for help. I won't read the next one, but one of the dramatic things when it comes to trafficking in persons is that many people still believe that the victims are guilty, that they impose this on themselves. And I see a lot of relationship between this and the problem that I have been working for so many years, which is drug use disorders. There is a tendency to blame the victim, and this is very dangerous if we really want to find a solution. So I wanted to show this image just to tell you that be careful with the use. Let's all, I'm calling myself, to be careful with the lens that we use to look at the problems. And hopefully these lens are allowing us to see things from the proper perspective, that underneath trafficking in person, underneath drug use, there is inequalities, there is poverty, there is suffering, there is neglect, there is abuse, there is stigmatization, discrimination, isolation, and all these things that we tend to see from our own lens of what we know, of our area of expertise, but that we need to put together in order to be able to, what I want to show in this next slide, to addressing all these problems from a broader sustainable development agenda. How can policies break these vicious cycles that lead to poverty, to unemployment, to lack of opportunities, to social isolation, to people wanting to escape realities and then find themselves in such terrible conditions as being in prostitution, slavery, and so on and so forth. Yeah? So as much as I showed you the connections earlier of trafficking in persons with the Sustainable Development Goals, these are also some of the connections that substance use disorders, including drug use, because not everybody that use drugs develop a drug use disorder, yeah? But all these issues that lead to drug use and development of drug use disorders are also related in a very complex web with all these development goals. So unless we tackle this problem, we will never achieve the access to health for everybody, gender equality, access to education, decent job, and so on and so forth. So this is an invitation for all of us to use our lenses and to see these problems as a complex, interconnected, but requiring going and seeing these problems probably not with the eyes, but with our hearts, to find what are the real reasons and what can we really do to help the victims of both trafficking in persons, but also drug use disorder, and worse, the combination of both. And with this, I finish my presentation, and I thank you very much for the invitation and look forward to future opportunities for collaboration. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sáenz, for this very interesting explanation that drug addiction and human trafficking is related. I think on the first view, one would not connect them or know where the connections are. So I'm very grateful that you pointed or showed this linkage to us. And this will be also very important for the next speakers and the next ongoing series of our webinar series, because it's a very important point of human trafficking. So thank you very much. Our next speaker is Mr. Theo Hendricks. Mr. Hendricks works as a general coordinator, sexologist, relationship therapist, schema therapist, solution-oriented psychotherapy, suicide preventer, crisis interventionist, counselor and teacher at the Manna Foundation. The Manna Foundation offers psychological, pastoral, and therapeutic help and advices on polyclinical basis. The Expertise Bureau offers a wide range of assistance, training, and scientific research with regard to human trafficking, specifically to lover boy problems, domestic violence, and honor-related violence. Theo Hendricks is also a former police official. Mr. Hendricks, you have the floor, and please unmute yourself.
Well, thank you very much, Sister Miriam, for inviting to speak here. And yeah, thank you. I hope that, yes. Yeah, welcome to this webinar where I want to speak about consequences for victims of trafficking in human beings, especially focusing on sexual and criminal exploitation. But before explaining the consequences and problems of helping such victims, I would like to give you an example of the problems that arise when a victim of sexual exploitation, prostitution, or criminal exploitation leaves the forced prostitution circuit. Imagine being alone and you meet an attractive and a sweet woman. After about 6 months, you want to propose to live together. To give this proposal a romantic touch, you book a table in a cozy restaurant and buy a nice souvenir for this proposal. During the evening, you will start talking to her about your proposal, but she interrupts you and says the following. We have a very nice relationship, and I think certainly it has a future. That's why I think that you should know everything about me and there should be no secrets between us. I have a hidden past, and I have slept with about 1,000 men as a prostitute. I've also made several burglaries and I have a criminal record. What is your answer? Will you continue the relationship? What do you think and feel for this girlfriend now? I give this example during almost every training course on sexual exploitation, specifically victims of lover boys. It's remarkable that rarely anyone wants to continue the relationship. Almost everyone has a problem with the idea that this girlfriend has been a prostitute and a criminal. This is one of the big problems. What does society think of someone who has been in paid prostitution and crime, even though it was often under great caution? How much mistrust or doubt do people have about these people and their life stories? Are these people really being helped enough to build a new future for them? Helping a prostitute is not always normally. And our practical experience shows that both in the Netherlands and international, there is still a considerable way to go and effective, sufficiently support for a new future. And in this webinar, I would like to take you on board the practical experience we have during problems with lover boy victims and their recovery and reintegration into today's society. And my hope is that after this webinar, you will have a better understanding of the problems and opportunities to make or encourage improvements. First of all, when a victim leaves the country or when he or she is asked for a relief effort, he or she regularly encounters incompetent workers, complicated regulations, limited final possibilities, and insufficient shelter and limited preconditions to provide adequate relief effort. Also, there are more often regulated options for legal underage victims. It's often difficult to obtain them as the facilities have already been fully used. So the options available to adult victims are significantly reduced. My theme for this webinar is then future or downfall. Problems with victims of sexual and criminal exploitation, the lover boys, during relief effort. I know a speech of 15 minutes offers too little space to discuss all these subjects or to provide sufficient insight, but I hope to provide insight into the complexity of relief effort and aftercare from 6 main topics. These 6 main topics are government regulations, personal problems, social and societal problems, meaning, security, and outreach offer. At first, a major problem is that guidelines adopted by the authorities regularly do not sufficiently reflect the needs and capabilities of the victims. Persecution of perpetrators is often difficult on the basis of the legal evidence necessary to convict human traffickers, including lover boys. In addition, the civil guidelines often do not offer sufficient possibilities in terms of relief effort, benefits, subsidies for special financial support, or opportunities for training and legal employment. The lack of adequate training, personal problems, or reference from the past, crime and prostitution, which are seen as determined business or organizations, create job insecurity. A major stumbling block is that the Dutch government has put the direction and approach in the hands of the local boroughs, each of which has its own policy. As a result, more and better relief effort can be provided in some boroughs than in others. Depending on political vision and views, the need to act and prioritization, victims receive their relief effort. In most cases, the range of care provided has also been determined on a regular basis with few possibilities to tailor this specially to the needs and requirements of the victim. As a result, victims often do not achieve the results that have been set as goals because their personality and circumstances do not allow them to sufficiently match the offer. A specific problem is the privacy legalization that regularly blocks or hinders relief effort. The reason for this is that relevant information can only be given to a limited extent, often only with the consent of the victim, so that the police and emergency services don't have any information and victims are unnecessarily put at risk or are unable to provide target support. Fortunately, more and more attention is being paid to the subject of sexual and criminal exploitation, as a result of which better thought is also being given to legalization, regulations, and directives. Unfortunately, changes as usual take a very long time, as a result of which victims are currently unable to receive the proper help that is necessary. The personal problems. Victims of trafficking and being have a multitude of problems, both personal and in terms of social context and living conditions. First of all, the complexity of personality problems and trauma don't make it easy to offer effective treatment. In addition, in most cases, trauma and addiction problems play a major role in the functioning and motivation of the victim, and a relapse into old habits or the resumption of criminal and sexual exploitation can often present. It's clear that only structural, specialized relief effort can produce effective results. In addition, living conditions are also an emphatic factor. These are largely determined by the victim's financial resources. These are often insufficient due to the lack of money, many debts, often more as €50,000, and the impossibility of providing them adequately. As already mentioned, Dutch regulations can often mean little. As a result, relapse is unintentionally stimulated because the victims have to survive, and this can only be done in the way of criminal acts and prostitution. Attention in sexual exploitation is often focused on women, but also men can also become victims. There is hardly any gender-specific relief effort for men who are sexually exploited. There are a number of reasons for this. Men barely talk about their problems in this area, sometimes because of the honor-related background that leads to insecurity, but only from the criminal environment, but also from their own family or social system. In addition, there is still little knowledge available to deal with and guide this target group effectively. A great deal of research is still needed in order to offer the right relief effort. The third is the social and societal problems. As stated in the introduction, society and the social environment are not waiting for a victim of sexual exploitation and criminal acts. Quite the contrary. In addition to stigmatization, people often have doubt as someone actually wants to leave the world of prostitution and crime. There's a fear of problems with criminals or of the victim's relapse. Lack of education, limited employability due to trauma or personal problems are also frequent obstacles to reintegrate into the workplace or joining social programs. In addition, the social environment has distrust due to the events that have taken place in families or circles of friends. Due to the circumstances of the victim, isolation from the family has taken place. The family is regularly traumatized by the events and their consequences. Many people have suffered negative consequences as a result of which they have distanced themselves from the victim. This means that reunification with the family system and social environment is often difficult because bitterness, feelings of revenge, anger, but also fear of reputation, renewed reaction, and lack of forgiveness towards the victim are prominent. Someone had said to me, "Who is waiting for whore?" And it's painful. The meaning. Meaningfulness is an important part of aid provision. Also, it is still too little taken into account. The major questions of life are, in fact, very relevant to victims of human trafficking. They have a great shortage of basic needs such as attention, security, appreciation, recognition, and love. These were often also parts of their lives that brought them into serious troubles. Issues surrounding the meaning of life, who they are as human beings, and what meanings they can have for their environment often remain unresolved. Our experience is that these conversations can be life-changing for the victims. Religious significance for victims also appears to be insufficiently addressed. Also, this can be very important for a number of victims. Then the safety or the security. A major problem is the long-term insecurity of victims. Shortly after getting out of prostitution or criminal circles, victims can normally be offered a safe place or dwelling. Long periods are usually more difficult. This constantly hampers the process of recovery and reintegration of victims. Uncertainty about safety regularly persists for years, both because of psychological experience or trauma, and also realistic because criminals are looking for their victims. That can be very dangerous for the victims. There are two important aspects to the reasons for intensive searching for and treating the victim. One is the source of income for criminal activity has been lost, and second, the prevention of the risk of criminal information becoming known. The problems are guaranteeing sufficiency safety are causing victims to hesitate to leave prostitution or the criminal world. In the Netherlands, a distinction is made between the ages of 0 till 18 years and beyond. Legalization, the range of relief effort offered, and the possibility for its effective use determine the range of relief effort offered. This applies to both men and women. Use for relief effort is reasonable, well organized. On the other hand, relief effort for underage victims is still insufficient equipment for victims of trafficking in human beings. Both the knowledge about effective treatment and the relief effort and the number of specialized treatment centers are insufficient due to the complexity of the subject and the possibility to support them. There are hardly any specialized centers for adult victims. The possibilities for relief effort are limited, often uncoordinated and not adapted to the situation. In addition, the range of service offered is only determined on a regular basis, which means that it does not sufficiently meet the needs and the requirements of the victims. As a result, the therapies and relief effort are insufficient, attuned to the need of the victims. This is a major obstacle to recovery of victims. Many victims are often asked for help, such as their request for help, decisiveness and clear objectiveness. Victims are often unable to do this and are therefore often rejected. More training for the promotion of expertise, better legalization and regulations and locations for specialized relief effort are necessary to obtain better results of recovery and reintegration. And finally, the last. Yes. If you look at the issues, we would get the impression that the fight against trafficking human beings and support for victims of sexual or criminal exploitation is lost. Fortunately, that's not the case, and we can slowly discover improvements in many areas. A significant number of victims have fortunately been able to build up a future, unfortunately often with lifelong negative consequences. Improvement requires close political, scientific, legal international cooperation with sufficient financial support in order to achieve even better results. As has already been pointed out, a new future for victims is certainly possible, and they need not be condemned to the negative consequences of human trafficking. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Hendricks, for this very interesting resume and explanation about how the victims of Loverboy method are impacted and what can be necessary and helpful for us all to get them out of this circle. Now, after having heard the presentations, we have a time of reflection, but I want to say you all listeners have a Q&A section. So if you have questions to the panelists, it's helpful to put them in the Q&A box and we will see them and give them to the panelists. But now we will first listen to a song that the Albanian organization Different and Equal produced. They are working with victims of trafficking, and they are using this video to raise awareness about the issue of trafficking. And during this time, you can also think about the questions you could have and just to have time to process all the important information you got. We have indeed 2 questions at the moment. And Nancy Brown is asking, how do you educate health providers, nurses, addiction services? Though there is nobody of the panelists directly addressed, but I have the feeling that you, Dr. Serns, would be the first maybe to answer this because you spoke also about this.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you very much for the question. Well, first of all, when we talk about drug treatment service providers, we are talking about a broad range of professionals and also non-professionals. It goes from psychiatry, psychologists, clinical psychologists, nurses, psychiatric nurses, but also social workers. And in the treatment of drug use disorders, it is very common to see that ex-drug users or people in recovery, whether with accreditation or licensing or not, sometimes as volunteers, are also members of these teams. So in UNODC, and there are also many other organizations doing this, we have specific programs to train people, health service providers, not only on the specific therapeutic modalities that are known scientifically to be effective, like cognitive behavioral therapy, motivational interviewing, counseling, special counseling, group therapy, family therapy, but also on how to approach and how to manage, how to coordinate these services, precisely for what I was mentioning in my presentation. Because in many cases, the lack or the limited access to treatment services for people with drug use disorders is due to the attitudes of the staff, the lack of knowledge, the own stigma and discrimination, yeah, or the lack of coordination, for example, with law enforcement agents. So if you have the police at the corner, using controlled substances is a criminal act, yeah. That's why in many countries we call for it's called for the decriminalization of personal use and possession for personal use of drugs. Even though according to the international conventions, using any of these substances is a criminal offense. So if you have the police around the corner, then people cannot come to the treatment center. Yeah, but a drug user will never come, even if they need the health care. So when we talk about educating service providers, is in addition to their disciplines in health or social work, is to giving them this additional knowledge so that people with drug use disorders receive the appropriate care and support that they require. I hope to have responded to the question, and if not, please, my email is available. You can contact me directly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saenz. I'm very happy that you spoke about that there are special programs that also exist. So that sounds very interesting and useful, and we might later to get some information also on the website or however. So that's very helpful. We have, I take two questions together because we get nice questions in at the moment. So Kelly O'Donnell asks, how long, or it needs a long time to recover, and what helps people to recover? And Yvonne van der Kar asks, is it possible for a victim to really recover from this ordeal, or will they always stay traumatized? I think that is very similar, and I think that Irena could be the panelist first to answer this question.
Okay, so the first question was, is it possible for a victim to really recover, or what help? Okay. It is possible to recover. It is possible to really recover, because we have to keep in mind that trauma is a response to a distressing or disturbing event. So the response we give to these events might change. And as long as these responses change, that event is not perceived anymore as a traumatic event. Of course, that is something that will never be forgotten. It is something that time after time may interfere in everyday life, but the way the survivors cope has changed. They have gained healthy coping mechanisms, and they can function normally in everyday life. And even when they have flashbacks, when they feel like living the same moments like in the past, they will know how to cope even with these reliving moments of the traumatic events. So when we say if they overcome trauma, we say, yes, they overcome trauma. Do they overcome memories? Do they forget memories? They don't forget memories. And memories are not just vision, like vision or auditive memories. They are emotional memories. And the way how they can cope with the emotions is something that they will learn during the support with others, from others. So we hope they will not stay traumatized, because it means that they will not have support if they stay through trauma during the whole life. And the next question, which was, can you help me, Miriam? How do we help, was something like that.
Is it possible for a victim to really recover from this ordeal?
Yeah.
Will they stay traumatized? And I added a new question that came in because it relates, and do survivors need specialized counsel services?
Yes, they need specialized counseling, but first they need safety. The first thing they need is to feel safe and not to be exposed, not just to danger, but as well to be exposed to unfamiliar situation. So whilst they are safe, then it's very important for them to give some reflection time, and not to get them immediately involved into this support system, because first of all, they just went out of a situation, of a very painful situation, and they will need time to relax, let's say. And after that, the support that has to be given has to be multidisciplinary, starting from safety, sheltering, going on with counseling, going on with social activities, going on with education, attending maybe school, college, or any other vocational courses. So step by step integrating to everyday life, but it has to be very careful, and we sometimes have to go with the rhythm of the survivors. So they are the ones that will show us how we are going to support them.
Thank you for this comprehensive answer, Irena. So we see how interesting and how interested the listeners are and the participants. Now the time is getting to an end, and I would like to ask the panelists if they want to say a final word to conclude the webinar. Who wants to start?
Irena.
Irena, you are still, you haven't answered.
I am still. Okay, I'm really grateful for this webinar, and as well to listen to all of you and your experiences, and very helpful information as well for me as a professional. So we don't know everything, and it's very important to share. I hope it helped as well what I put here, and hopefully we all together can make it more, raise more awareness and bring more people together and actually do something like action.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Sáenz is...
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, to thank Michelle and Sister Miriam, for your excellent sharing of the meeting. To the rest of the panelists, it was an honor to share with you this excellent opportunity. And to the audience, invite them to visit the UNODC website, where you can find more information about trafficking in persons and what UNODC does around the world. Maybe there will be also emails and contacts of our organization in your countries. And you have my email in case anyone wants to contact me for more information on this topic, or specifically on drug use disorders. I'll be very pleased to provide more information. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sands. Now I see that Mr. Hendricks is still taking some notes. So Mr. Hendricks might speak in German and I would translate, so you are free to choose your language.
Ja, normaal gesprochen spreche ich niemals Englisch.
Ja.
Only Dutch, German. Also ich versuche es auf Deutsch und ich hoffe, dass es getranslate kann werden.
Ja.
Wir haben viele Mädchen hier. Also viele Victims haben wir an dieser Seite. Aber ich mache es ganz kurz. Es ist es wert, für den zu kämpfen. Denn jeder Mensch ist ein Mensch. Und wenn ich sehe, welche fantastische Personen das offen sind, dann frage ich mich, wie ist es möglich, dass Leute so andere Leute etwas antun. Und darum ist es wert, dafür zu kämpfen. Und so schön, dass so etwas wie dieses Webinar, dass das auch stattfindet. Ich hoffe auch, dass es noch öfter so geht. Und dass es dass wir das können teilen, zusammenarbeiten. Zodat wieder so ein Victim gerettet wird.
Okay. Thank you. So Mr. Hendricks said that he's working with many girls, so he has a big expertise, and he says it is worthwhile to fight for them because every human being is a human being, is a person, and the girls he sees, the victims of trafficking he works with, are fantastic persons. And he asks himself, how can people do this harm to other people? How is this possible? And it is worthwhile to fight for this. And he's grateful also for this webinar, for the collaboration between us. He's hoping that the series might go on, so that we can work together to save more of the victims of trafficking. So
Thank you, Schwester.
And now for the concluding remarks, I give the floor to Michel to close the session.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Miriam. Thank you all the presenters. Thank you all the participants for being so involved in asking questions, in making comments and proposals. This is indeed a collective learning experience, and we shall continue this series. Allow me to say that we should not forget the spiritual dimension of this fight. Please keep in mind 2 dates. Tomorrow, first, the 2nd of December, which is the International Day for the Abolition of Slavery, and also in 2014, the day when a joint declaration of religious leaders against modern slavery was signed in Rome by Pope Francis, by the Archbishop of Canterbury, as well as spiritual leaders of Orthodox, Muslim, Jewish, Hindu, and Buddhist faith. The second date I would like you to mark on your calendars is the 8th of February. It is the feast of Saint Bakita, a former slave who became a saint. It is also the International Day of Prayer and Awareness Against Trafficking in Persons. In the meantime, I do encourage you to download the handouts of this webinar, PowerPoints and Word documents, which you can find next to the Q&A tab, and to visit the ChristusLiberat.org website with a collection of best practices and also access to a free online course on human trafficking for helpers. And the opportunity also to register to all future webinars. We already have one webinar planned for the 13th of April on root causes demand as root cause for human trafficking. Other webinars shall be announced shortly on the following issues. And international prosecution of human trafficking. Where do we stand 20 years after the adoption of the Palermo Protocol? Thank you, Elizabeth, for showing us this very important international treaty. Trafficking of human organs. You mentioned that, Elizabeth, but actually it's linked also to WHO. It's linked to many networks, including to criminal networks, and also écologie intégrale et esclavage contemporain. Yes, my French-speaking friends, we do not forget you. You know that we have also subtitles in French when we record our webinars, but we will try also to make webinars and podcasts in French. Also, human trafficking as a threat to international and domestic security. Indeed, it's not only a humanitarian issue, it's not only a criminal issue, it's also an issue which should be of concern for security, including, I would say, for the UN Security Council, but also for regional organizations and also, obviously, for domestic authorities. Then, definitely, education. Many of you in your comments have highlighted the need to be better educated or to have the possibility to share the knowledge, to share your experiences. Indeed, it's what we want also to discuss, education and training on human trafficking. And the last, religions against human trafficking. Yes, indeed, we think that all religions have values which could support this struggle, this fight against human trafficking, and which could usually complement international treaties and domestic legislations. And that's all for tonight. Thanks again for being with us. Best wishes to you all, and see you online or in Geneva or elsewhere, actually. Okay, all the best to all of you, and thanks to all the good work you are doing in each of your parishes, congregation, and also university, and wherever you are. Thank you again. Goodbye.